step in and assist another federal agency that puts up 5% of the cost to perform the evaluation for you, with you. Here's the apology slide. Okay, now we recognize that probably from on that side of the table here, that we're just all the government, we're all the federal government, and unfortunately that's just not the case. So, but we're trying. The FEMA and the Corps has formed a group, an advisory group, and they are looking at the differences in these two systems, or these two methods of evaluations and inspections. And they're finding out what's common, what's not, what's different about them, and what can we do about it. And so the goal in the future to being that there isn't this separation between these two inspections and evaluations, so that as we go along, our inspections and more importantly, our 5-year periodic inspections that we can do would be enough of an evaluation criteria that FEMA could use. We're not there yet. We were just looking at earlier today a report that came out, but again, they're still just kind of identifying what's the same and what's different, and no one's really agreed on it yet. And I think looking at the time frame you guys are looking at, probably won't be there before you need to have your levy accredited. So that's my last slide. The picture of your levy. When this is over, we're going to have time for some questions up here. I hope I don't disappoint you by not being able to answer all of your questions. In fact, I'd be surprised if I could answer all of your questions. I'm never very good at that. But I do carry a pocket full of business cards. And so if I can't answer the question, I'm going to give you a business card, and on it is my email. And if you email me your question, I'll make sure somebody who knows the answer to your question will respond to you. But I've only got 6 business cards with me, so. Thank you very much.
Reed, you're up. I have to say, we just finished clearing the last tree this last summer, so the news is a little late.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for having me here. And credit to your council and your city staff for putting this together early. If we had done an education session like this early on, we would have been much better served. So happy to be here to be a part of it, because I think it's a really good idea. My name is Reed Wagner. I'm the Executive Director of Multnomah County Drainage District. And while the name would suggest otherwise, we're not part of Multnomah County. We are a true drainage district, which gives us very limited statutory authority. We manage our own district and 3 other districts along the Columbia River on the north side of Portland. We have significant infrastructure behind these levees. We have residential communities. We have industrial land. Specifically, we have Portland International Airport, water wells, military properties, about 2,000 residents, about tens of thousands of jobs behind the levees. And although we're different somewhat in scale, we're similar in the sense that we manage our interior drainage and exterior drainage. So we pump water out into the river as much as we're holding the river back. So it's quite a balancing act. As Jonathan mentioned earlier, or asked me earlier, we have 27 miles of levees. And we have been a good levee system. In 1996, we experienced a 100-year flood, and it performed well. We did not breach, and we had some significant adjustments and improvements we had to do after the storm, but it did what it was supposed to do. I started here at Multnomah County Drainage District about 2 years ago. So it was July of 2012 when I started. We had a significant retirement from our organization at the time, so we had a lot of brain drain as well. So as I came in July 2012, I think it was a month later, I got a letter from Mark and his team that said 2 of our levees, which consist of about 11 miles of our system, the certification was going to basically end early. It was a 10-year certification that was coming to an end within 11 months. Something like that. I'm itching right now. significant discovery process pretty quickly. What does this mean? Why is this happening? I think one of the things we learned early on is people at the federal, the state, and at the local level are trying to get smarter and reserve the right to get smarter as we learn about these new storms that we're experiencing in the United States. Some of the devastation that's happening. How do we keep that from happening in our communities? We consider ourselves a public safety organization. We consider ourselves economic protection for our areas. And so we started looking to our federal and state partners especially as to what this all means, why we're doing it, and does it make sense? I think one of the things that was pointed out earlier is that people are doing things with the right intentions, but sometimes the outcome of that can be difficult and it can change from community to community. One of the things that we learned early on is when the Army Corps of Engineers and headquarters in DC decides that they have a national policy, it may not be the best thing for our local community. And our regional office knows that and has to manage through that, and we as local community have to manage through that. So that's one of the early things we learned about as we were learning about this process was why is it happening? What's the purpose of it happening? And that it's imperfect, but people are trying to get better. And so we as a local community are trying to be better too. We started looking around the country, and we looked at about 7 communities that were similar to us. Different levels of urban development, different levels of flood protection. And we were trying to determine the cost associated with this. How big was this problem? And of those communities, had varying per mile costs associated. But the average across them was about $7 million per mile. We have 27 miles of levee. That was bad news. Now, we like to think that we've been doing a good job maintaining our levees. And we have. We've been good stewards to our levee system. But that doesn't take into account the shifting criteria from when we were told that maintaining it this way was enough, to now learning that maintaining it this way is what you need to do. So while we've been good stewards, some of these things may have been out of our control as far as knowing how to keep them up to these new standards. And so we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars that we're looking at. Then we said, we've got to do a cost-benefit analysis here. Do we do this? Is this something that we do? I think you've heard from a lot of the experts here today that there's a significant economic loss. And so we engaged the conversation with our business community. The ones that we rely on to help us to understand cost-benefit analysis. And it took them very little time to decide that we needed to reaccredit. We have to figure out as a community how to reaccredit. And they certainly talked about the National Flood Insurance Program and the impact of loans and things of that nature. But it was also those development restrictions that you heard about, that they couldn't count on making improvements to their property, and they couldn't count on developing new property. And behind our levees, we have the majority of the future industrial lands for the Portland metropolitan area. Suddenly, those don't become as appealing to future purchasers. So what they realized was they were going to price themselves out of the market if they were going to have to be in the flood zone. So reaccreditation no longer was a questionable decision. It was what we had to do. And it was really the business community that said, we need to move forward. And they've been behind us all the way and continue to sit at the table with us. I think the other thing that we spent considerable time doing when we were going through discovery is relying on other folks that have gone through this before. There's not many. I know, Jonathan, you've done an environmental scan out there. On the West Coast, there's the Sacramento area, there's the Kent, Washington area, Seattle, but there are few of the districts that have gone through this, and now we face some pretty serious timelines. So we worked a lot with Sacramento to understand what kind of decisions they made and why. And we learned from Milton Freewater about the costs associated with not making the decision to reaccredit early on, and how losing money, I think we talked about exporting dollars instead of keeping it in our community, was not something that we wanted to do. We also realized that we couldn't do this alone. The drainage district certainly, we small in capacity, both financially and personnel-wise, but also with a limited district area where we can raise money. We have a lot of limitations there. So it was really important for us to reach out to our partners, to the cities that overlap with our districts, the county, the Port of Portland, our state partners, and our federal partners. And what we decided early on, recognizing this kind of impacted all of us in different ways, whether it be property value and the income tax revenue that came from it, the port's inability to be in a flood zone similar to the forestry service, the industrial land futures of the city and metro. That since we all really had, this had an impact to our communities, we decided to come together under what was called an Oregon Solutions process that we set up with Portland State University. And what it does is it allows us as a group, as a community, to make decisions about how to move forward in a neutral area. And we started about December of last year, and we are at the point where we decided to move forward with accreditation, do the investigation. We decided as a community, and Mark touched on this a little bit, whether or not to go with the Corps to certify these levies or to go with a private contractor to certify the levies. And there's a lot of pros and cons there. The cost-benefit analysis we did included policy. At the time, there was a national policy on vegetation, which really was no trees in the levee. Is that about right, Mark? Okay. We have thousands of trees in the levee. It's really hard to remove a tree in the city of Portland without starting a strike, many other things from happening. So we knew that was going to be a rubbing point for our community. We talked about cost. Because the Corps didn't have significant information in the levee in that area, they let us know that it was going to be costly. They weren't sure that it was going to cost any less to go with the Corps to do the certification. The Corps at the time had a resource issue. They weren't rehiring at the time, and so it would have put a strain on them to be able to go through this. And there's also a time frame of certification. Mark mentioned that they have a 10-year time frame. Well, private consultants can certify for a longer period of time. It's not a national policy that sets the time frame. That's Corps policy about where they think that, how long they think their certification lasts. So those are some of the things that we took into consideration when we made that decision. We've gone forward with the investigation. I call it a vulnerability analysis because this first part of the investigation is for the consultant to say, where might there be problems that you have to address? And that's due in about September. We'll then, as a community, move forward and identify options to solve those vulnerability problems. And then we'll get to see how big the price tag really is. Like I said, we were talking scope based on what other places did. This will give us a clearer picture of what the cost will be. And then, assuming everything goes well, and it has been going well with our partners, we as community partners will make decisions together about which options to take, how we're going to address them, and how we're going to deal with costs. Now, cost is a big thing. I think you used the term sticker shock, Mark, and yeah, I had sticker faint a couple times, as I started to look at these other districts, what setback limits cost, things of that nature. And, the state is really taking a keen interest on this. This is not just Reedsport and Portland that are going through this. We estimate there's about 28 other cities and communities that are going through this at some point in time. Most of them are on the initial discovery points. And so we have state departments that are right now identifying concepts for legislation. We have state legislators that are putting together early concepts for bills. Excuse me. And we have a governor's office that is very much engaged in discussing how to include solutions, including financial ones, for these flood protection criteria changes. And so there's a lot of attention on cost. There's also, and I'll leave this to our federal specialists, new changes in how we're dealing with federal acts and identifying projects for funding. So my point is, we don't have all the answers yet, but we have a lot of interested people. And to the extent that we're still coming together to figure out these problems and work through these problems, I have some hope. When I talked to Sacramento, who've just gotten through this process, they had huge costs associated with this. I think that they were, one of their small levee systems in Sacramento was a $200 million fix. They had to come up with some of the money locally, but then their state came up with an equal amount. And then the federal government, and this is where it gets a little bit difficult, it's been authorized but not appropriated, has agreed to match that cost that's been put together by both the state and the locals. What we're learning in Washington, as they're coming up with solutions, is that they too are coming up with a state and local solution that the locals themselves could not just manage into this. I'll tell you too, both in California in the past and Washington, we're currently passing bond measures to deal with flood protection across the state. Most of these states don't have the funds and the infrastructure to deal with the changing criteria, nor do the local communities. So in Sacramento, they passed a $6 billion bond, I think it was about 8 years ago. In Washington, they're looking at a possible $3 billion bond that would combine water supply, flood protection, and water quality. So there are a lot of discussions out there about solutions with the financial side, as well as solutions for setting the criteria and keeping our communities safe. That's what I have today. Anything you want me to tell us?
The initial cost of the analysis, you have the sticker on that.
Yeah. So we're on budget year 2 of that. And for the 11-mile stretch, which losses certification, the investigation and all the costs associated with that would be about $3 million. Yeah.
All right, we're going to run along here, so bear with us. Brad, here.
Right, members of the Milton Clearwater Flood Control District and City Council of Milton Clearwater. I'll try to keep it short. Overview of our levees. We have about 11.5 miles of levees. They were originally constructed in the 40s. Were finished, I believe, in 1951. That might not be exact. We had a flood in 1964-65 that took out part of our levees due to turbulence before we had a drop structure to take the turbulence out of the water. That flooded a area that didn't have any houses or anything. It was a fairgrounds. Didn't do a whole lot of damage, but the Corps came back in 1965 and redid the levees and raised the levees another 3 to 4 feet in areas and reinforced the levee system. The levee system got a drop structure put in that 65 revamp, and the drop structure is a concrete drop structure of approximately 20 feet in height, and it had a fish ladder on what would be the west bank. So we had a flood control district set up early on by the county. So our county took it and turned it over to a flood control district. And they established the right-of-way lines. Our levee sits on all private property. It does not belong to the city. It belongs to the flood control district. So we maintain it. That's all we do. That's all we have the authority to do. And that's what we do. We're there for public safety. So we're rolling along. We started out in 1951 with $27,000 to maintain 11.5 miles of levee. We now get $23,000 to maintain 11.5 miles of levee. So you can understand our challenges. So the community, our community is a little unique. It's a he said, she said, you did, you didn't, until something happens. And then we all come together and we solve the problem. So we had a board in there that didn't have any money, so they didn't maintain the levees. They overgrew with vegetation. They were damaged in some floods. Nobody did the inspections. We were in a rehab program didn't get turned in, so the Corps didn't rehab it. So we had not only not maintained our levees, but we had lost opportunities to have repairs done by the Corps. In 1996, the Corps was in there doing a study on what we call the Marie-Dorian Dam. It's the old dam for the power station. City of Milk Creek used to produce power with the river, and it was also a irrigation structure. And they dug up behind it doing the study, and that winter we had a flood event, and it dug underneath the dam. So they removed the dam, which caused some of the rocks and some of the deposits in the bottom of the river to move in directions that they hadn't normally moved in the original designs. We also had trees growing in the middle of the river, which was stopping the rock flow from flowing down the river as the original design intended, with no vegetation. And this brought the bottom of the river elevation up. Therefore, we lost our capacity to hold 12,000 cubic feet per second. And in the meantime, the county built a bridge that was only enough flow for 9,500 cubic feet per second, so that wasn't going to work either. So basically, we had a board in there with no money, community with no confidence whatsoever in the board. And the district doesn't encompass the city. It only encompasses part of the city, and then it encompasses part of the county. So the district isn't just in the city or just in the county, and it's not owned by the city. So there's political pressure both ways too. And people in the county are, why do we have to pay for it? The levees protect the city. Well, you use the infrastructure too. It's a community deal. You all have to come together, or you don't have a community. So in 2009, the Corps kicked us out of the rehabilitation program because we had 3 attempts to pass bonds of, I think it was 600,000, 1.2 million, 1.7 million to do repairs. Small districts insurance dropped our liability insurance, and all 5 board members quit because they could be sued personally. It threw our levee district in a total disarray. And basically, we were done. Our levee system was just going to be left alone. People were going to pay flood insurance. Well, we had a meeting hall about this size, our community building, and there was about 10 times as many people in it because they were awfully mad at the federal government because they were going to have to pay flood insurance. And they found out that it was going to be $2,500 to $3,000 a year. So at that time, that's when 5 of us stepped up, and one of the original board members stepped back in also, and we all volunteered for the board, and we said, hey, we're going to fix this. We're not going to just sit on our hands and just basically let this go to hell, tell you the truth. We stepped in there. We were fairly aggressive from the start. We made some mistakes. We pulled through pretty much. We finally got Oregon Solutions involved because we had other problems that you may or may not have at this point, and you don't have them at this point, but you could have them down the road. We had an endangered species called the bull trap. We were told, don't take a tree, don't pluck a blade of grass, don't do anything. Well, we burned the levees because we had to make a decision. What were we going to do? Public safety, or were we going to do fisheries? And our job was to do public safety. So we went into it and we told everybody right up front, we're here for public safety. If you guys want to get on board, we will work with you. We got Oregon Solutions involved. We came to an understanding with all of the agencies, and we had a lot of them. I believe there's about 13 of them. And we got that understanding done, and we put it in writing, and I'd say 90% of us all signed it. We signed it, and about 90% of the agencies. There was a couple agencies that wouldn't agree, but we didn't care. So then we started a campaign, and we told everybody how much it was going to cost them. And our community was going to lose about $3.8 million per year to the federal government for flood insurance. Or we could all pull $60 a year out of our pocket in a bond for $3 million, $2.8 million, and fix our levees on our own. went to the Corps and they said, well, we can participate and we can probably get some things done and we can start a study. And so we went ahead and told them to start the study, but we found out it was going to take 10 years to study it. We didn't have 10 years. And then we said, well, what can you do in the interim during that 10 years? Well, nothing. We got to get the study done first before we can even go after funding to fix your levees. Okay, now it's going to cost us $20 million in 10 years. So we have to fix this ourselves. I guess the moral of that story is you guys are going to have to talk to all your neighbors because it will destroy your economy in this town. We saw it firsthand. I live in a small neighborhood, younger generation, about 25 homes, 5 of those people lost their homes. Directly due to they just could not come up with $500 more for your young families with young children. They just didn't have that extra few dollars. Probably shouldn't have had loans on their homes. You know, got money, buy a home. Maybe they shouldn't have bought a home. That's neither here nor there. That flood insurance wouldn't have had to kick in, and it wouldn't have, and it was only the preferred rate at that time. My preferred rate was $475. Okay, so it's not $129 like you see on TV. It's starting at $129. My insurance was estimated to be over $2,800 a year on my home after the preferred rate kicked out, and we were fortunate. Senator Wyden's office and Senator Merkley's office, Greg Smith, all of them kicked in and got us an extra year of preferred insurance because we were trying. What happened was a miracle. We passed the bond with over 80% vote. The bond prior to that had to have a supermajority. I think some of you might know that in this room because your bond passed, but it didn't pass. The bond before that for us passed, but it didn't pass. What basically the state and federal agencies were looking at is if you don't care enough about your community to pass a bond to try, why should we? Why should we help? So we passed the bond, $2.8 million. Then we went and started politicking. We started looking for money because we knew we were going to need more. We got another $2.7 million. We found it. It was a miracle. Then we pressed forward and we went as fast as we could. We hired engineers. We got the designs done. We went in and got the work let out and we got stuff done. We fixed the bridges. We fixed the walls. We fixed the flood walls. We fixed the riprap. We're on our last project right now. We just let out another $600,000 project. That's the finish line. These people would say it's a success. It's not over by any means. We still only have $23,000 a year. So how do you maintain those levees afterwards? That's what you all need to think about. Because your city, what I found out today, very proactive. Your council, you guys need to applaud them. They're looking at this thing. You aren't in the trouble that we were in. You're not there yet. You will be if you ignore it. But you're not in that trouble yet. Yours is fixable for a lot less pain. I don't know dollars, but a lot less pain than what we went through. So your council's been proactive. Your city manager's proactive. They know what they're doing. They're telling you the truth. They're telling you the facts. You guys that showed up tonight and all these empty seats, you need to fill these empty seats at the next meeting, and you need to start telling the people the truth. Those dollars are going to be exported to the federal government insurance program that you're not going to see a dime of unless you have catastrophic failure. And is she right about the insurance? Yeah, if you're in the X zone, I would purchase $300 or $400 a year insurance just in case the tsunami came. It's insurance. Don't rely on the insurance to protect your community because it's not going to protect your community. Only your levees are going to protect it. Only upgrading those pump stations and making them more effective is going to protect your community. And that's all you guys have is your community. When it comes down to this, the economic failures in real estate and everything else is going to be real. And as far as the National Flood Insurance Program, I've only got just a quick story about it. you're going to have people say, well, my house is paid off, I don't have to purchase it. And it's going to be a business owner that has a $250,000 line of credit on their house and their shop and their property, and the bank's going to show up knocking at their door saying, hey, you got to purchase flood insurance. Well, why is that? Well, we're calling your note on that $250,000 line of credit that you just paid your payroll with on $100,000 worth of payroll for the last month. They're going to call the note because it's attached to that property. I know because we've seen it happen in Milton Freewater. So it goes deeper than just, do I have a mortgage or don't I have a mortgage? It goes directly to the businesses in your community, and it affects them. And the commercial insurance is more money than the house insurance. So these businesses that have loans on their buildings, they're going to pay. They're going to pay because it's all tied to the lender's insurance that they have. So it's all tied together. You guys really need to be talking in your community and support these people that are trying to support you and try to get something done. I don't have the answers for your guys' levy system. I can just tell you what we went through, and it was miserable. We feel good now. We're in a better place. We're back in the Corps' rehab program. As a matter of fact, the Corps just accepted some damage from last year on our drop structure. We completely refaced our drop structure with concrete, and we had a flood event, and it damaged it, and the Corps is coming back in, and they're going to fix it this year. So, right along with the other project that's down below. We had another project with the Corps that they sponsored, and the project failed. Not at the Corps' fault. Nobody liked it. Nobody liked the design, nobody liked the project. Cost the district $62,000 and it didn't even get built. So, I guess the moral of my story is you can't just run to the government every time something happens. Sooner or later, you guys have to stand up as a community and just do it. Just do it yourself. Because that's what we did. And trust me, we have a lot of help from all of these agencies. They will help you. But if you're not willing to help yourself, they can't help you. They just can't. And we found that out the hard way. And I wouldn't want to see Reedsport go through that. You guys have a very nice community here. First time I've ever been here. And I think I'll come back. So, do what you guys can in your community and try to support these people that are trying to get this done because it is important economically. It's probably one of the most important things you guys will do. That's pretty much all I have, guys. Other than we wanted me to talk a little bit about the certification process. Hire an engineer, and a good one. Certification process is a lot of paperwork. As it stands right now, correct me if I'm wrong, you guys aren't kicked into the flood insurance program. You're not outside of the Corps' rehab program. So you still have some time, but not much. If you have to go through the recertification program, if they kick you into the flood insurance program and they just blanket map you like they did us, it's much more expensive and much harder to get out of that. And if you're proactive and you try to get the maps done now, the LiDAR has been done, the cross sections have been done. These guys are way ahead of the game compared to where we were at. And we passed our bond in 2010, November 2010, and we were out of the flood insurance program in October of 2013. So it can be done. It's just how bad do you guys want to do it? That's pretty much all I have. Thanks.
Thanks, Brad. Can you eat, 8.5 hours to be here to speak to you all?
This one, Brad.
Thank you. I can address this a little bit from a personal point of view. My name is Joel Smith. I'm an engineer that's hired by the city. Every month I write a check for $208 for flood insurance. It's not a pleasant thing to do. Excuse me, but it's the cost of living on the river. So a couple of things I'd like to address tonight is where we are, what have we done, and where do I think we should be going. Just for your information, Of the 2.6 miles of levee, there's only 4,100 feet of the embankment that is below the 100 plus year plus 3 foot flood elevation. And there's only 1,400 feet below the 100 year plus 2 foot flood elevation. So to put it in perspective, that's only about 10% of the levee embankment that needs to be raised. The question is, what level does it need to be raised to? Is it the FEMA level or is it the Corps of Engineers level? And that's what I've been struggling with for a year, to sort my way through the morass and find out where do I recommend to the city that you need to go. There's 4 elements to what's called 44 CFR, which is a study for floodplain certification. Okay, there's a seepage and settlement analysis, there's an interior drainage analysis, there's a survey that's required, and an emergency action plan. The seepage and settlement analysis, in my mind, is going to be the most expensive because the worst is required. But it's also going to show that probably there is no seepage, and there's probably not going to be much more settlement as time goes on. However, the ticket price on that is somewhere between $250,000 and $300,000 to come up with that answer. The second area that causes me the most concern is the interior drainage analysis. I can't give you exact numbers. I can't even tell you what your systems are capable of doing in terms of what year flood occurrence, because we haven't performed the studies that are necessary to do that. The cost for that interior drainage analysis that I've been given by consultants is somewhere between $150,000 and $200,000. Okay? The cost to make the repairs that I can see in the interior pumping system is somewhere around $2.5 million. It's a frightening amount, but I think it's a doable amount. The surveying, we've just gotten some LiDAR mapping that I don't know what the effect's going to be, but there's still additional work to be done, but it's probably a minimum amount of money to do that. And the last one is the emergency action plan. And the city has a very good tsunami plan that a lot of people have worked on, which I think can be easily adapted to our need for that particular element. So to me, the place to start is a study of what does your interior drainage analysis look like? How well are your pump stations going to function? Like it's been stated, the Elm Street pump station needs a gravity drain. Okay, the time frame or the window of opportunity to do that cost effectively is rapidly closing, because in 2016, ODOT is supposed to repave Highway 38. Once they repave it, the only way they'll let us cross it is to bore underneath the highway. Last year we did the 16th Street Waterline project. We saved probably, I'm guessing, almost $100,000 by being able to open cut Highway 101. And that project worked out very well for the city. So I think that what we're looking at down the road is, number one, maintain the staff that you have. Because even before I came here, they did an excellent job in taking the information and the inspection reports that the Corps gave them and clearing the levee and doing all the things that they could reasonably do with the budget they had. And they've done a very good job of it. One thing that went in their favor, contrary to Multnomah County's experience, since this is a logging community, it was a lot easier to cut a tree. And as like Jonathan said, last year the last tree left. So Jonathan asked me to talk about one more thing, which kind of caused me a chuckle. He said, what are the unknown and varying factors that are looking down the road? Well, Jonathan, I hate to tell you, but I've just that class in college, and I've never been offered a crystal ball. But I think before we go further, that we need to have a more intense session with FEMA and the Corps of Engineers to let's identify the target. You know, possibly through the Senators and Representatives office, because everything I'm seeing says that that target keeps moving. You know, so what we need to do is nail it down. I've had several meetings with the consultants that are working for Multnomah County drainage districts, project. They're the only people who have gotten A levy certified, other than Mountain Creek Water. And they did both Castle Rock in Washington and Camas, Washington. They are very knowledgeable people, but they're very expensive. However, I would recommend that we move forward with a plan. Number one, identify the problem, and two, identify the solutions. Thank you.
Dan, you're up.
Hi, thanks so much. Mike, close it on. Is this sound okay? Sometimes I get out of the range of the microphones. Blame it on my parents. My name's Daniel Whalen. I'm Senator Merkley's field representative for coastal Douglas County. I've been here a lot. I am Molly McCarthy's country, Senator Wyden's field rep. She wasn't able to be here. We're kind of a team been working on this at the two offices for the last 6 years, and even Congressman DeFazio's office. And I was wondering if Ron Kresge, I don't know if anybody knows him, was here tonight. Ron worked on this as well. When Senator Merkley came to office, one of the first things I did is come down to Reedsport, met with Mayor Timchuk, and learned about this issue regarding the levee. You know, the FEMA maps were coming into play, and you know, we understood that, well, they were going to redo these maps, and it's changing a lot of other things. It was changing things in the valley, changing, people were learning things about letters and map amendments, and how that was going to affect them in flood insurance. I just look back to that time of being up to now, and Reedsport's a perfect example of communities whose issues have impacted policymaking on the national level. Your situation has changed federal law, and I'm going to just briefly explain why that has happened. How that will be able to help your situation may or may, depending on the timing, but what you've gone through has really impacted, I think, a number of different factors involving the laws that govern how we authorize the Army Corps of Engineers and how we fund them. So, really quickly, when I came, learned about the issue, it turned out that, you know, the levee needed to be certified, had to be inspected and certified, and there was a problem. You couldn't get the Army Corps folks who built the levee to actually do the certification process because of something called the Thomas Amendment. The Thomas Amendment was something that was in a piece of legislation called the Water Resources Development Act. Every 2 years, Congress, for many years, passed this thing called the Water Resources Development Act. This basically allows the Corps to do what they do. It says, you're going to do this, and then that's the authorizing bill, and then funders, called the appropriators, give them money to do that. So that's sort of a two-handed thing. Congress doesn't work that well anymore. And it's one of the most frustrating things that my boss, Senator Merkley, has experienced. And so in one of those earlier WRDA bills, there was concern that the Army Corps was competing with private engineering firms, and that wasn't fair. And that might be an issue on the East Coast, where you've got up and down the East Coast many engineering firms, many different water problems. But that didn't take into account what might happen to communities out here that have to deal with levees, both in Milton Freewater, you know, along the entire western seaboard. There are small communities that were impacted by this who couldn't afford an engineering firm that might have been in Portland or Seattle to come down. And at that point, because it was such a new process, updating the maps and certifying it, it was unclear whether or not FEMA would even accept a private engineering firm, and the costs were astronomical because of liability insurance. And so this Thomas Amendment was very frustrating. How do we get around it? So our Senator Merkley's office, Senator Wyden's office, Congressman DeFazio's office worked with the Corps, and one of your predecessors, Jared Christensen, had actually figured out or knew another Corps office in, I think, Missouri, that had used the Chiefs Economy Act to try to get around this Thomas Amendment by finding a federal partner. And, you know, we did what we could to get everybody in the same room, in the agencies, the Forest Service, the Army Corps, the city did all sorts of legal memoranda to try to get this done. You folks put a lot of effort into it, the agencies did, and it worked. And after that point, it started to become standard practice. People called our office, called the Portland region, around the country trying to find ways to use the Chiefs Economy Act to allow the Corps to do this certification process. And all of a sudden, that was great. It was my first year working for the Senate office. Woo, all right, we got it. And we learned what happened when they did the evaluation and then realized the extent to which there were problems that had to be fixed. So they couldn't get it certified. Had it been fixed, it would have been done at that point. But just that issue on the Thomas Amendment, I'm going to jump forward right now. This last June 10th, since we passed the most recent Water Resources Development Act, it's called the Water Resources Reform Development Act, in 7 years. And it just passed, it was finally signed by the President, and there are a number of things in that bill that correct a lot of these problems. We got rid of the Thomas Amendment. So the Corps can now do certification of third-party communities if they ask. There's also another feature in this that says there's a 50-50 cost share where the feds will come up with half the cost of that process. And that was something that, Senator Merkley, after the frustration from that initial year and up into the town hall he had here, hearing about what happened in Freewater and other areas, trying to deal with this bureaucratic situation that might have worked for New Jersey and New York, didn't work for Oregon. It was incredibly frustrating to see how that happened, so he was determined to change it. So was Senator Wyden was aware of it, and Congressman DeBazio as well. Senator Merkley sits on the Environment and Public Works Committee. That's the committee that's been working on this bill that just passed the last 6 years. And so it was a priority of his to get the lessons learned from this experience to fix that problem and other communities similarly across the country. So, hopefully, moving forward, as soon as Corps has guidance to do it, you won't have to do that with the federal partner, and there might be additional funds available. Senator Merkley now sits on the Appropriations Committee, so not only the authorizing of word language, he wants to be there to help on the appropriation side, to fund that cost share, and we're to also fund, dredging works throughout the state that helps on water infrastructure. But key to that is the appropriations piece, which they're still in the middle of doing. Which is but a bill has passed, and it passed in this Congress. It is bipartisan. People recognize the value and the concerns that folks have across the board and why we need to invest in that infrastructure so that happens. From that point going forward, as the city was working with FEMA and various agencies, and I think a number of folks have said, this is a good levy. This is not a levy that is as efficient as so many others. The moving target Joe talks about is right on the dot. I mean, the agencies will admit that too, trying to align those things. How do you align one standard set of specifications to another? In that bill that was just passed, Congress demands them to align them. The specific language is something along the lines of, let's see if I've got my great notes here. Let's see. Well, if I could read my own handwriting, I'd probably do that. But basically it says, it directs the Corps to be able to align those standards in the inspection process with those of the National Flood Insurance Program. That is going to take some time, but it is, the intent of Congress to say, we understand how frustrating this is, that there's a moving target, we got to align them, and we're trying to give the Corps the authority, the directive to do that. And that bill that just passed is basically that allows them to say, we have the authority now to align these standards, and they're going to try to do that. So as FEMA was updating their maps, there was an issue, as I said, if it's not certified, then it's not counted as no levy in the maps. Well, when Senator Wyden and Senator Merkley heard about that, that kind of was very frustrating because, because whether it's a funding issue, whether it's the moving target, how to certify it, this should not show up on map as reading as no levy. So they both contacted FEMA and said, do not list this as no levy on the maps, and got a pledge from FEMA, who are still going through a rulemaking. The last time I spoke with them was a couple of weeks ago, and they said that in response to their advocacy, the senator's advocacy, that they will not call this levy or other levies that aren't certified as no levy, but are coming up with a rule to give it a percentage of how much that protection reads. But I think Brad's point is, if it's possible to avoid that position, but rather let's get it certified, you don't have to deal with it. But if it's not certified in time, the FEMA is supposed to have this rulemaking completed within this year that will determine how much protection that provides, and that will impact flood insurance rates. But that's still an unknown. When I press them, they're not really sure when they're going to get that rating started. But for now, it means the current flood protection is sort of grandfathered for now. But, you know, it's something that, as frustrated as you must feel about this whole process and learning about these moving things, you know, it's impacting federal policy and directing the agencies to respond to that. So not only the Thomas Amendment, but aligning with standards, but also that letter to make sure that those letters are given that credit. The other piece of, my boss is sort of passionate about this, is he's from Myrtle Creek, Oregon. They used to flood a lot. He actually brought me to the Dairy Queen and said where the water went up to over the parking lot, and you know, he goes to that Dairy Queen all the time. He probably should lay off of it. He's got high cholesterol. So the other piece, so now is funding mechanism. Because across Oregon, water issues have been a critical piece of each municipality's financing difficulties and funding challenges. I know the city of Reedsport renewing their water infrastructure, face high interest rates and issues surrounding that. So one thing that the senator wanted to do is take a program that was modeled on a transportation program called the Transportation Innovation Investment Act, TIFIA, and make something called WIFIA, the Water Infrastructure Financing and Innovation Act. So that is basically a program because, for years the federal government has not been investing as much as it did in infrastructure. And the current fight in Congress of the gas tax and everything sort of highlights that, why we have deficient bridges, we have deficient water infrastructure. So in the Water Resources Development Act, or Water Resources Reform and Development Act that just passed, he got included this program with WIFIA that's supposed to provide direct, low-cost, low-interest loans to communities for projects. It was designed to help those communities that needed a new wastewater system, a new drinking water system. It's sort of modeled on complementing the Clean Water Revolving Fund and Clean Drinking Water Revolving Fund, EPA programs that help you build a wastewater treatment plant, or rural development funds that help you build these things. These WIFIA dollars are direct low-interest loans from the Treasury that will enable folks to complete those projects at basically up to half the cost of the project. It's been authorized for $50 million to go to the Corps and $50 million to go to the EPA in order to leverage up to $1 billion in sort of more water infrastructure. Your experience with your levy directly influenced his decision to expand or attempt as hard as he can to bring other members of Congress, members of the Senate on board to fold in levy infrastructure. So when WIFIA is up and running the rules, and we're looking for at FY 2016, money for this levy, depending on what status it is, could be sent to a low-interest loan through this WIFIA program. It's not a grant, which would be ideal. That doesn't mean that other funding might not be available. I mentioned the Clean Water Revolving Fund. It's an EPA program that helps pay for infrastructure that help with sewer and storm drains. And, it's just talking to Ed, if it's something that qualifies for that program, it may also qualify for a WIFIA direct loan, and I'm just thinking the drainage analysis system. So being able to expand that capability to whatever we can use is going to be something the Senator's going to keep pushing. And even though that bill is passed and it's moving forward, passed and signed by the President, it still has to get guidance from the Corps. So the Congress says, we want you to do this, and sometimes what Congress says is very simple. We want you to align these two standards. It's not always that easy, so it takes time for the agencies to really identify that guidance, and we will be watching it every step of the way and trying to get it moving as quickly as possible. I'm going to try to wrap up a little bit more, make sure I didn't skip on anything, but I'm here, and also Molly, who's with Senator Wyden's office, who's with Senator Wyden, which is why she can't be here. We're available for questions. I got a bunch of cards. You can get in touch with me. I know Jonathan certainly knows how to get in touch with me. As I said, emails over and over, asking, what house that levee go? But like I said, it's been 6 years, and this is what brings me back to Reedsport a lot, that and going to the dunes and the Harbor Light Restaurant. My wife's like, you really like to go there, and she looks at the credit card and she's like, yeah. Let's see, there's another the levee safety program that has been reauthorized in WRDA is something that is going to be re-examined again to try to make sure there's any other way to help communities develop that program, specifically called, it's a program that's supposed to provide technical assistance, so when the guidance from that comes forward, it might be something that else could be. The Levee Safety Initiative, which, the establishment of voluntary levee safety guidelines, but also technical assistance to states to help. So if it's another one of those programs that can help the state in turn help the long-term safety operation or development of plans associated, whether it's with mowing or woody debris or whatever, but, any and everything we can try to get to direct resources towards this problem, we're going to keep trying to do that. Because it's not just Reedsport, it's so many communities along the Columbia River or up and down the coast are facing this, and it's something that Jeff hears every time he visits them. Just like every time we go to small communities in Eastern Oregon, it's fire and water infrastructure, or down the valley, or Harrisburg, or Monroe. I mean, these water projects are just so expensive, and to meet the regulatory regimes we're very sympathetic to, and how we can help with the investments towards that. With that, I'm going to wrap up because I know we got one more speaker, and you folks have been very patient. But thank you so much for being here tonight and being so involved in all this, and whatever we do, we're going to continue. So, I don't want to steal those here.
You take whatever.
If I was talking really fast, I just had a lot of caffeine today.
Thank you, Ed.
It's always good to be last. Jonathan asked me to spend the next 4 hours talking about regional solutions. I'll be brief. But before I talk on my piece, Jonathan asked me to talk about regional solutions. Let me just give you some personal piece of my wife and I's journey the last few years. We love the Oregon coast. So we bought our first property on the Oregon coast together in 1997 on Evo, and we love not only the Oregon coast, but we love